All right, if I could suggest one rod for a beginner surfcaster that I would want when I was first starting out surfcasting, I would suggest the Lamiglass Carbon Surf 9-foot medium on the Penn Slammer 3500. Let's start with the rod. The reason I would suggest a 9-foot rod for a beginner surfcaster, or when I was first starting out surfcasting, it's a lot easier to work the lures that are in that 3 to about 7-inch size range. Now, if you actually have to manipulate a lure that's in that size range, and you're using a 10, 11-foot rod, if you move just a tiny little bit, the top of your rod is gonna move a lot. So what's gonna happen is when you try to work a pencil or a spook, or even some sort of a soft plastic, even the smallest movement is gonna be greatly exaggerated. Now, if you have a 9-foot rod, which is a smaller rod in the surfcasting world, and you try to work a spook or a pencil or soft plastic, something that you have to impart action to, you have more forgiveness in the movements that you do. And it helps you get more feel for how to work these lures. And you get a better sense for, if I move my rod this much, the lure is gonna move like that. And if I can do just a very subtle movement, maybe there's little subtleties within movements that with a large rod you're not going to be able to see, where with a smaller rod you might be able to actually manipulate the lure in multiple different ways, eventually leading to you being able to better work lures, especially when you upgrade to larger and larger rods. And for certain scenarios that are very specific that you need bigger rods for, but if you do end up using a bigger rod, you're going to have to, when you end up manipulating lures with them, you're gonna have a way better understanding of how much you need to move that rod to affect the lure in the way that you want it to. And you'll have a better sense that, oh, I'm affecting that lure too much, because you'd have already played around with those smaller rods, like the 9-foot rod size. You'd have already played around with working those lures to a dramatic extent where you're putting a ton of action into them, or moving the tip of your rod a greater distance, and how that looks to that lure. And then you can actually see that when you're using a bigger rod, that even with such a little movement, that lure is moving a lot. And so you'll be able to get a better sense of what you're doing. So that is why I like to suggest using smaller rods when you're starting out surfcasting. The other reason is the difference between a 9-foot, a 10-foot, and maybe an 11-foot rod in casting range. From a 9 to an 11-foot rod is maybe only 6 feet. From a 9 to a 10-foot rod is maybe only 4 feet in casting range that you would end up losing if you're using a 9-foot rod. That's actually not that much. And it's a lot less than most people actually think. So that's why I always suggest, again, if you're gonna buy a rod, you wanna look at buying those smaller rods, because for the most part, you're using lures that are in that 1/2 ounce to 3-4 ounce size range when you're striped bass fishing. And a lot of those lures are those smaller 3 to 7-inch class lures. This rod as well has fantastic backbone for the price that it comes in at. And I know this because I have a few times hooked some really big bass in some really sketchy places. And if I wasn't able to actually turn those fish, I 100% would have lost them. There's this one day in particular where it was a few falls ago, it was about 5 years ago. I was surfcasting and I hooked a bass that was low, mid 40-inch class fish, and it was off the rocks on Cape Ann. And for those of you who probably are not familiar with the rocks on Cape Ann, they're big granite rocks that are very unforgiving and sharp. So if those bass even whatsoever take you into that structure, they're gonna break you off no matter what. So I hooked this bass, and of course, right, it runs straight into the structure. And I was able to turn that bass with this exact setup, this exact reel, this exact rod. I was able to turn that bass and get him up and out of that structure by really just tightening into it and applying nice even pressure and lifting that fish out of the rocks and eventually turning that bass away from the rocks. So that gave me the confidence that in this setup, especially this rod's doing its job. It's giving me the ability to lift and raise a bass that was probably close to 25, 28 pounds. So that's a pretty big fish. And it's a pretty small rod to be able to move a fish like that. And so I was very impressed by that. And it gave me a lot of confidence in this rod. There was another time where I was fishing this other spot where it was late fall, it was really cold out, and I was fishing this spot where of course there's a blitz and there's a gap like this in between the rocks. I was standing here and I had to cast over this rock that was maybe 4 or 5 feet gap in between me and the rock in front of me, or it's more like a rock gut. So it was like a big line of granite that was just pointing in one direction. So I had to cast over the top of that to land in the blitz. And of course I hooked this giant fish, and this fish was huge. I'm talking 46, 47 inches and like deep. So you'll be able to see, I'll put some pictures of these fish in there. It was a deep, big bass, and it ran the wrong direction. Now, if it kept running in that direction, it would break me off for sure, because there's no place to land the bass over there. I couldn't get out to that line of rocks. So what I do is, I'm fighting this fish, I end up turning my rod completely to the side and putting all the pressure on that side of the face of the fish that it is running in. Because if that bass is kind of getting pulled in the same direction that it's running, it's gonna wanna pull against it. And if it's hooked directly in the mouth somewhere, you have a better chance of that pressure getting applied in the right place for it to then want to turn and swim in the other direction. So it was a lot of luck involved, but I was able to apply pressure in that direction, get that bass to turn and swim back in the direction that I needed it to in order to land it. I then just maintained pressure to that fish, just making sure it didn't pull any of the hooks, got that fish to swim all the way around that boulder field, and it was down pretty deep, like maybe 8 feet deep. And so once it got around the point of that rock, I really tightened up and lifted that fish, and I was able to turn him. And of course, right as it got close to those rocks, it tried to run in there. And I lifted that fish up and I lifted that fish up, finally got him up and out of the structure, got him up on the surface, and took away a lot of the, I guess, leverage that it would have on me, and was able to get that bass in. And that was a big, heavy fish. So that just shows you that this rod, for a $200 rod, can really turn some fish. Now, that story is a perfect example of why this rod, for the price point, being like a $200 rod, is totally the rod that I would go for if I was a beginner surfcaster and was trying to find something that was a great all-around rod, because but it does the most important thing, which is if you do hook a big fish, it can fight that fish. Now, I was able to turn and lift that bass out of that structure. And so it does prove that it has a bit of a backbone. Now, it's not an elite rod in the sense that there's other rods that have way more backbone, but it's nice to know and have the peace of mind that it is capable of doing something like that. The other reason I like this rod is it's a pretty sensitive rod. And that's awesome, because the Lamiglas Carbon Surf is built on a blank that, for its price point, is a very good blank. And they definitely cut costs on some of the materials that they use to build this rod. But the fact that it's on the blank that it is, which, as we've already discussed, is a powerful rod, means that it's also very durable. So this blank is a very durable blank. And to me, somebody who fishes 180 days a season, I need a rod that I can really abuse. And I don't care if it's 100 pounds, as long as it's gonna be durable and hold up. I really want that rod. Because I want a rod that I can really abuse, and it's gonna withstand that abuse and be able to perform an entire season. The durability to me is always number one. And the materials on this rod, again, I don't want to go too in depth with the materials because I'm not a materials guy. I don't know the specifics of everything. This is more of my personal experience with this gear. And I know that the materials that they're using on this rod, they're solid. They're durable, and that to me is all that matters. I don't need them to be the lightest materials in the world. I just need something that I know and can trust that will work for me. Now, the Penn Slammer, let's get into this reel. This is a great reel. The reason I like this reel so much is because it's pretty well sealed. So if you get splashed by waves and you're in and around the salt all season, it's gonna, for the most part, be able to keep a lot of that salt out of the reel. The other reason I really like this reel is it has a lot of drag and it's very smooth. Again, bonus to that is the reel is very comfortable reel handle on it. So it's a very comfortable reel to fish with because it is very smooth, very powerful, has a lot of drag. You can really lock in and stop a big fish if you need to. And it's just an all-around solid reel. I really like Penn's reels. I also would suggest the Penn Battle as a little bit less expensive reel. And the reason I would suggest the Penn Battle is because that reel itself is maybe not quite as good sealed, but it still has a lot of the power that the Slammer does have as well. And so the Penn Battles are fantastic reels. I fished the Penn Battle 3s for the longest time, and would even buy the Penn Battle 3s when the Penn Battle 4 was out and all the rest, because I love that reel so much. And even they dropped the price like crazy on that, and for its price, it was amazing. So I would just buy that reel over and over again. And Penn has great customer service, so if you do kill a reel, oftentimes you can send it in and they'll even replace it for free. I've had that happen before. So I really like Penn's stuff. And I fished their reels super hard, and I did when I was first starting out surf casting, and they always would hold up for me, at least make it through a whole season, even though I was fishing them really hard and dunking them and getting splashed by waves, which they're not designed to do. But I was able to fish with those reels basically the whole season without killing them, and highly suggest them. And Shimano and stuff, they make great reels too, but I have the most experience fishing the Penn Slammers and the Penn Battles and Penn in general. So that's why I'm talking about the Penn Battles and the Slammers. So this combined is a great all-around setup for those reasons. And if you are, by the way, if you are liking this video and you want to like and subscribe, it goes a long way. And I'm going to make a ton of more videos on gear in general that I use, as well as I'm going to have a ton of videos coming out throughout my upcoming season, really just documenting what I do throughout the season. So I'm going to have a ton of videos coming out throughout the season that's going to document what I'm doing, and will be actual fishing content too. So please like and subscribe. It goes a long, long way. All right, let's get back into it and get into some specifics on this rod. So this rod is a medium fast action rod, but it's a pretty fast action rod. I'm going to show you the exact specs. It's rated from 1/2 to 3 ounces here. Let me see if I can't do this without banging into anything. The only reason I have it separated, by the way, so I don't bang into the ceiling and everything. But oh my gosh. Yeah, that's actually fine. We're good. You guys can see that. Where is it? Please just focus for me. All right, so as you can see, those are the specs on the rod, the specific specs. It is a 70-30 split, so it really gives you that like one-piece rod feel, and that's where it gets a lot of the power from, is it being a 70-30 split. But if you're able to, if you live in a place where you can't have the rod fully out, you can have the rod together, and you have to take it apart to fit it in your car or to fit it in your apartment or whatever, that's a very good plus to having a 2-piece rod. And then having it be a 70-30 split gives it that 1-piece rod feel, which gives it a lot more power as well. So that's why I really like this rod. The other thing I really like about this rod is it has a big beefy butt to the rod, and that's great for obviously a handle. It tapers into the handle, but I like having the handle there, but I also like to use this as a walking stick when I'm going across the rocks. And it's big and durable and rubbery, and I've used this, and there's a couple little nicks on it, but for the most part, it doesn't even look like it's hardly been used. And this is a pretty old rod. Like, I've probably used this rod for 3-4 years. Like, I've fished this rod hard, and it's, as you can see, like pretty durable from the outside, and I've dropped this and fallen on it. And that, again, the durability piece of it is a big, huge piece of it that's really important to me. Now, I fish a lot of pencils and topwater and soft plastic, jig heads, and all sorts of stuff like that. Those are great for fast action rods. Like, I want a fast action rod when I'm working pencil. I want a fast action rod when I'm working soft plastics and jigs and stuff like that. So overall, with that stuff, it does a really good job. Now, if I'm using things like a live eel or certain metal lips, I want more of a moderate action rod. I want it to be a little bit softer in the tip of the rod, and it doesn't do that as well because it is a fast action rod. It has a little bit stiffer of a tip to it, and it's a fast action rod. So it's a really solid option for the majority of the lures that you would be using surf casting. If you want to do a lot of live eeling and stuff, then you probably want to go in a more moderate action rod route, but you could still get away with doing it with this rod. Like, all rods you can basically do everything with, especially nowadays in that price range. Like, you can work everything with well, but there's stuff that's more ideal to work with. Like you might get more sensitivity or less sensitivity depending on that, but that's a whole sidebar, and we don't need to go into that. For the most part though, this rod is gonna be able to handle all the lures that you're gonna be throwing. It's gonna be able to handle big fish. You're gonna be able to cast far with it. The reel itself is very smooth. I like the 3500 size reel for a 9-foot rod. It just pairs well weight-wise for this rod. That's why I went with the 3500. You got plenty of drag and plenty of line pickup. I'm not worried about that, even though it's a small profile. The thing that's really good about that though is it's very light. So this whole setup, you can fish all the time, every day, all day, and it's gonna be very light and you're gonna be able to fish it all day. And at the end of the day, whoever has their line in the water the longest is the person that's gonna catch the most fish. It's pretty simple. So this being a lighter setup is gonna help you fish longer and harder. And when you're a beginner and you're like, when I was a beginner, the only reason I was able to gain as much knowledge the only reason I was able to gain as much knowledge as I did, as fast as I did, was through experience and trial and error. And that was just pure time on the water, being able to fish 180 days a year, twice a day for hours at a time, and being able to use the gear, the lighter gear, like that would have even increased my chances of learning more knowledge faster and being able to fish longer with less pain and not throwing my back out trying to use a big rod. Because I used too big of a rod. I started with like a 10-foot rod, a Penn, like one of the Penn rods that was like 10 feet. And it was just way too big. And I wish I started with this setup from the beginning. And then I ended up spending more money in the long run because I was buying multiple rods until I eventually learned that you really want to start with those smaller rods because you're going to help you learn how to work smaller lures. And then you want a nice solid reel that's going to be durable, hold up in the salt conditions, which unless it's a Van Staal, it's going to be tough. But Penn does a great job, and having the slammers being a little bit more water resistant, it really does help. So having a reel that's going to be durable and withstand a whole season is very important to me. So that was a huge factor. Well, it took me a while to figure out what reels were the best, but I used Penn from the beginning, and I basically stuck with Penn until I ended up getting a Van Staal. But like I stuck with Penn for a long time because they had durable, smooth, good drag. And even though like I was learning and figuring out, oh, that's what a fast action rod is, that's what a slow action rod is, you know, this rod's too big for what I'm trying to do, this rod's too small. Like as I was doing that trial and error, I would always figure out, well, the Penn reels are fantastic for all of that. Like they're durable, they're smooth, they have good drag. They just withstood all of my tests. So that's why I still to this day will fish a lot of them. And I really like the Penn reel stuff. So let's just do a quick recap on why I'm gonna be using this setup. So I fish with the Lamiglas Carbon Surf 9-foot medium. I love this rod because it is a pretty inexpensive rod for how powerful and durable it is. And it will withstand very hard fishing and abuse. I really like to have a smaller rod because it helps when you're working those lures that are in between those 3 to about 7-inch long lures. It helps you implement more precise action to them and then will help you eventually catch more bass because of it. I like the Penn Slammer reels because they are very well sealed for what they are, and they're durable, have a lot of drag for what they are. They're extremely smooth, they're light, and they have great reel handle that just makes it feel good to fish with. If you want to pick up this exact setup right now, which is the setup that I would use as a beginner surfcaster, go to the link in my description to Fisherman's Source. They're a great online tackle store and they'll get this out to you nice and quick.